children now go out to their classes, please. We're going to open up the Bible now at Psalm 139, verses 1 through to 18. And this is the passage that Jonny will be opening up to us in a few moments' time. It sort of dovetails in nicely to what we heard about what is God, doesn't it, at the start, about his nature, his characteristics, the God and the Father that we can trust in. So as I read this out, perhaps have a think about what we heard about at the start. And Jonny's going to open up anyway to us in a few moments' time. So it's Psalm 139, and we're going to read verses 1 through to 18. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all of my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light becomes night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious are me to your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you.
Great. It's great to have you joining with us this morning, especially if you are a guest. Now, before Christmas, we handed out some of these cards to everyone that came to our Christmas services. This card asked the question, if you could ask God one question, what would you ask? I remember handing it to someone and they said, wow, what a question. What on earth would you ask if you were given that opportunity? Well, you are still given that opportunity. You can still fill that in. But what we're doing in January is taking some of those answers and looking at them, thinking about them. Some of the most popular questions and some of the most interesting questions. We're going to be looking at them on Sunday mornings in January. So you're very welcome to come back again for the next 3 Sundays that there are left in January. But you might be here just for the baptism of Summer and Rachel, which will be happening at the end of our time together, rather than for the question. If so, the question that's been submitted that we're tackling today is very appropriate for this occasion as well, and hopefully that will become very apparent very soon. So the question we have for today is, what are we here for? 42. That's your answer. 42 is what we are here for. At least that's the answer that was given in the Douglas Adams radio series and book, and then the film that followed as well, by a supercomputer. The book was, I can't remember what it's called now, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that's it. And someone had asked a supercomputer, what is the ultimate question, the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. So someone asked that question, what is the ultimate question of life? What is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything? Someone had asked that to a supercomputer, and after 7.5 million years, the computer finally came up with the answer. However, by that time, everyone had forgotten what the question was. And so 42 was the answer, but what is the question? Well, who knows? But what are we here for? is one way of wording that question. What is the ultimate question of life, the meaning of everything? That's one of the ways we could word that question. What are we here for? Because if we can figure out what we are here for, then we can make sure that we are then living out our ultimate purpose as human beings. Now, for Christmas, one of my daughters had a toy guinea pig that was a mummy guinea pig, and it was supposed to give birth to these baby guinea pigs. And as normally happens in our house, once someone's got a new thing, it's given to me to, first of all, get out the box, because that's almost impossible these days, and you need a chainsaw to get toys out of the boxes these days. Once we got it out of the box, it was then a case of, can you put in the batteries? So I put in the batteries, all done, all taken apart, all ready to play with. However, having not read the instructions, I ruined the magic of this guinea pig having baby guinea pigs. Because once the mummy guinea pig was fed and happy and put back in its hutch, ready to have these baby guinea pigs, it was then supposed to be that the baby guinea pigs would appear. But I'd already taken them out because I hadn't read the instructions first. So we went back to the instructions, saw what we were supposed to do, and then the magic then appeared. Well, the same is kind of true of life, that we need the instructions. We need the Maker's instructions in order to know what we are here for. And for that, we're going to quickly look at the first chapter of the Bible. It'll come up on the screens there. Genesis chapter 1, which says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.' And then a few verses later, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good." And I think there are three key principles to draw out from these initial instructions that were given to humankind, which are about what we are here for. So first of all, that we are here to enjoy God's presence. We're not made out of some lack in God. It's not as if God was lonely and he thought, I've got to make human beings in order to make up for my sense of loneliness, or for his amusement, or for him to feed on in some way, as many of the gods of other ancient religions had. No, God always existed as Father, Son, and Spirit in this eternal community of three. And he was perfect in that community of three in one. And that's why the verses that we just read out, they talk about God saying, "Let us make mankind in our image." It is plural, it's not singular. It's not "let me make mankind in my image," it's "let us make mankind in our image," plural. And God made us so that we could then enjoy him, so that we could be with him. The psalm that was read out earlier as well, that conveys the sense of the intimacy that a person can have with the God who made us, the enjoyment that we can have of God. We did a question and answer earlier in our service. Well, over 370 years ago, there was a group of Bible scholars and church leaders who came together in order to do a question and answer teaching thing, a catechism, which is the old-fashioned word. So similar to the one that we've used this morning. And the very first question of that Westminster Shorter Catechism, it asks this: what is the chief end of man? Old-fashioned language for what is our main reason for existing as human beings? What are we here for? And the answer that question and answer gave was, as many of you will know, that we exist to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So we exist in order to worship God and to enjoy God. You see, many people think of God as like Miss Trunchbull. in the Matilda books and films and musical. A harsh and overbearing character, a rule-enforcing, miserable disciplinarian. That's how many people think of God. And other people still think of God as distant and unrelatable, someone that we can't know, someone that we can't experience, someone that we can't enjoy. But this truth conveys the very opposite of that, doesn't it? God is someone to be enjoyed. God is someone to be known and experienced in our lives. And we exist for that very purpose, to actually enjoy God, to experience him, to know him. Well, secondly, we're to display God's image. We're made to enjoy God's presence so that we can then display God's image. The way animals have been made, some of them, you can well imagine God having a blue sky session in order to come up with some of the designs of the animals that he's come up with. So God says, we've made this anteater. It eats ants. It looks great. But how's about we put fish scales on it? Giant fish scales. And we put it on top of this anteater, and then God has got a pangolin. If you don't know what it is, look it up. It was blamed for COVID. It didn't really cause COVID. But then God makes lizards, all kinds of different lizards. And he thinks, we can have fun with this one. Why don't we make this umbrella mechanism that pops out of the side of its head? And if you look that up, there are lizards with giant frills on the side of their head, just pop up out of nowhere. Amazing. God makes beavers and otters, but he also makes ducks and geese. He thinks we can combine these. And all of a sudden you've got a duck-billed platypus that many people didn't even think was a real animal when it was first discovered. But when it comes to humans, God is very deliberate in the way that he makes humans. He makes us in a very particular way. Because he makes humans to be in his image. We are made as human beings to be something a little bit like God. We're not exactly like him. We're not gods, despite what some people think about themselves. Less said about that, the better. But in some way, we are to reflect something of who God is. We are to image what God is like. You see, God is invisible, isn't he? We can't see God. We don't know. We can't say this is what God looks like. He has no image. But we as human beings are to fill that gap and to be his image in the world. So that means that our purpose as human beings is to be a little bit like God. And that's particularly, but not exclusively, in relation to God's moral character. So we are to reflect God's goodness, his love, his justice, his righteousness, his compassion. In those ways, we are to be a little bit like God. We're to display his image in the world. Well, thirdly, we are to spread God's rule. We are given God's image in order to spread God's rule. Have you heard about the latest Banksy that has appeared in Wales? A piece has appeared in Frill, in Denbighshire, in North Wales. It turned out not to be a Banksy, though. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It was just a local artist that sprays in the same style. But in the world of graffiti art, what will often happen is that graffiti artists will come up with their own tag, which is a word or a name that they spray in a certain style in order to say that this artwork is mine. I mean, some bad graffiti artists, they just spray their tag everywhere, and you think, what on earth is that about? But other artists, they will spray a lovely mural, a lovely piece of art, and then put their name on the bottom, tag it, in order to say, this was done by me. I have been here, I have created this art, and this art was by me and has gone here. And that's kind of what we as human beings are to be like. We have God's image, which is his tag, and we're to take that tag and place it all over the world. To say God has been here, if you like, or God's image has been here. So we're to rule according to God's ways and take his image out into the world. And in those verses that we read out in Genesis, it talks about human beings subduing and ruling the world. That's what we're talking about. But if we're to do that without God's image, if we rule and subdue without God's image, then human beings become exploitative. We're oppressive in our rule of the natural order. And we don't care for each other as human beings as well. But when we rule with God's image, it's like we're artists working in the image of God, creating these beautiful pieces all over the world as we spread out with God's loving and caring rule. We spread out, organizing and ordering and subduing the natural world, and doing so as human beings by creating a peaceful, harmonious society. So these three things that are there right at the beginning in God's instructions for us as human beings, these three, they work together. As we enjoy God's presence in our lives, so we are then able to bear God's image, display God's image in the world, and so we are then able to spread God's rule, his good and helpful and happy rule across the world. And at this stage in God's process of making the world, once human beings are there, God looks at it all and says it is very good. Not just good, but very good. This is right. This is how it's meant to be. Now at this point, I want to ask you to have a think. How are we doing as human beings? If those are our three core things that we are here for, three core instructions, how are we doing with that as human beings? Are we all enjoying God's presence as human beings so that we know him and love him? Are we being a bit like him in all of his good moral character? Are we caring for his world and living in harmony with each other as human beings? How are we doing? I think we'd all admit that there's something that's gone wrong. If this is our original purpose as human beings, then something has gone wrong. And the Bible gives us insight into what exactly has gone wrong. We have sinned, which is where we take God's instructions and flip them on their head and say no to him. And we have turned each of these instructions on their head. So instead of, thirdly, spreading God's rule, instead of doing that, we've exploited the world, or we've neglected the world, and we don't live in peace but create animosity. For the second one, instead of displaying God's image, we display some very ungodlike characteristics in ourselves, and we turn ourselves into God. Instead of enjoying God's presence, we've decided we can live without him. We think that we can enjoy other things instead of enjoying God the way that we ought to. But our failure to carry out these instructions as human beings then brings us to our fourth instruction or fourth principle of what we are here for. So fourthly, we are here to experience God's grace. And in one way, this actually becomes our number one reason that we're here for. The rest of the Bible is God unfolding and modeling his plan to sort out the mess that we have made with the world. He determined to make a people for his own, and he called a group of people to be his own people, Israel. He determined for them to know him. He determined for them to be a bit like him and to bear his image. He determined for them to spread his rule outward so that all the people of the world would know the blessing of knowing God and enjoying him. But that didn't go the right way either. This people, they turned their backs on God. They turned all these principles on their heads. And it wasn't that God's plan had gone wrong. It was simply that he was building up to a time that would come. He was building up to this momentous event when Jesus would then turn up. What all the nations couldn't do, and what Israel, God's people, couldn't do, Jesus did. He fulfilled all of those first three principles in himself. He did them. So Jesus as God, he lived in perfect relationship with his Father. He enjoyed his Father. He brought the Father glory. Jesus bore the image of God. He was the image of God. He modeled God's own character in humanity. He never failed in that. Always did what was right. Jesus spread God's rule wherever he went, and he prepared the way, particularly when he came back to life again, for his rule to spread outwards and for all nations to be brought in to know God and to be part of God. And Jesus made all of that possible then for us as humans to do. He did this by giving his life to pay for our failure. He died in order to secure our forgiveness for when we have failed in these instructions for us. And he's made it possible by being included in him that we can then fulfill these principles and fulfill our purpose as human beings. When we come to Jesus and trust in him, when we receive the forgiveness that he offers, that's what it means to become a Christian. That's what Summer and Rachel are saying has happened to them. That's what they're showing by being baptized, as will happen in just a moment. They have come to trust in Jesus. They have come to him to receive the forgiveness that he offers. They have come to put their life in his hands. They've experienced his grace that forgives. You see, grace is God's loving kindness. It's that he loves us even though we don't deserve it. That he freely gives us his forgiveness as a gift. That he wipes out all that we've done that is wrong and that he makes us right with himself. That's what grace is. That's what we experience when we become Christians. And for all who will become Christians, that then means that they can live according to their original purpose as human beings. In fact, it's only in becoming a Christian that we can then live according to our original purpose as human beings. Because we need God's grace, not only to forgive for times when we fail, but then to enable us and empower us to live according to these ways. So when we've become a Christian, when we experience the grace that forgives us, it is then that we can enjoy God's presence in our lives. It is then, in that forgiveness, that we experience the change, the ongoing change that happens, that shapes our character to be more like God. And it's once we have tasted of this grace that forgives us, that we then want to share that with other people and spread God's rule, his kingdom across this whole world by sharing that good news with others who then come to know him and who are then part of that kingdom and experience that hope with them. I think the reason we tend to ask this kind of question of why are we here, or what is our purpose, what are we here for, I think the reason that we ask that as human beings, which I think most of us do at some point, the reason we do that is because we've lost our sense of purpose. We've broken our sense of purpose. We don't know what we're here for, and then inevitably we ask the question, what are we here for? I would actually say that if we cut God out of our lives, as long as we leave God out of our lives, we are left with a meaningless existence. We're left without any real purpose. But when we look back at our Maker's instructions, we see both exactly how he wants us to live and exactly how we haven't been able to do that. And yet the Maker went one step further, not in just showing us what we should do, but what we haven't done, but also how we can be brought back to that original purpose by experiencing his grace. Grace that forgives us, grace that brings us to himself, grace that enables us to then live with Jesus according to the original way that we were supposed to live. And you know what? This offer is open to all. All are invited to experience this grace for themselves. All are invited to trust in Jesus and know that forgiveness which cleanses us, which makes us new, which empowers us then to live the way that we are to live. All are invited to then live according to our originally designed purpose. If you're here as a guest, if you don't yet know and trust in Jesus, then you're invited to be a part of this. It might be something you want to think through, something you want to ask more questions about. That's what we're here for. Come every Sunday. And there are other things that we put on that can help you in thinking these things through and explore them for yourselves. If you come from another part of the UK or another part of the world even, then let us know. Wherever you go back to, we'll put you in touch with other Christians who can help you in thinking through these very important questions. What are we here for? Well, to experience God's grace, his forgiveness, his kindness, so that we can then enjoy his presence, bear his image, display it, and spread his rule to the world.